Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman encounter horror stories. First story, some stories from my time as a dog walker. Honestly, I'm pretty damn stoked that I found a place where I can tell some stories that have been haunting me for years now. Yes, years. Every single time that I've tried to open up and tell people about the shit I've seen in the past, they think I'm insane, and I swear they're always silently debating if I need to visit a therapist. Not that I blame them, really. For those pet lovers out there, can you imagine a better way to spend your day than traveling around your city, walking, playing with, and feeding tons of different pets? I could make my own schedule, take as many jobs as I wanted, anytime I wanted. In a populated city, there were opportunities everywhere. It seemed absolutely perfect. I ended up being a dog walker and pet sitter as a second part-time job for about 2.5 years. Let me tell you, I've seen some weird shit in people's homes. I'm not talking about dolls or large piles of dog shit on the carpet, though that's pretty common. It gets much, much weirder. As a privacy measure, I won't release the street names of any of the houses or places I mention. For obvious reasons. My first story is from my beginner days, back when I was nervous about being in someone else's home all alone. I had your normal fears. Someone is setting me up. What if I get injured? What if I get robbed? The usual. I was being paid to walk a shepherd mixed puppy who is still being potty trained. So I get to the house and it's nice. Large, fancy neighborhood. You had to have a code to get in sort of deal. It's pouring out, so the walk is pretty short because this puppy is not having it. He's begging to go back in. I shoot the owners a text, and they say to hang out with him for a bit longer and not to worry about the walk. Cool. I can chill here and play with this adorable dog. No biggie. We're sitting there on the floor. He's biting in my hands when I notice footsteps coming from upstairs. Now, I know that no one else is home. The owners tell me all the details before I come and are required to let me know if someone will be in the house at any time during my visit. The puppy, Cooper, doesn't seem to notice or care about the noise. Is anyone up there? I call out, and not surprisingly, I get no response. Slowly, I stand up and walk over to the foot of the stairs, noticing wet spots all the way up the stairs. My heart is pounding, right? So I call up one more time. Hello. The house is mostly silent apart from the sound of Cooper's nails on the hardwood. But from further back on the second floor, I can hear what sounds like singing. It's a light, feminine voice, almost like it's coming from inside of a shower. At this point, I feel a little bit more at ease, thinking it's probably one of their kids, and maybe the owners just didn't think they'd be there. Maybe they stayed home from school. I had no idea. I started to walk up the stairs, following the large drops of water. They continued all the way up around the corner. As I got to the top, I swear to God that I felt every bone in my body turn into jello. It was a girl, sure, she looked pretty normal. Apart from the fact that she was standing upside down on the ceiling. I shit you not, just standing on the ceiling, staring at me, her hair wet and dripping on the floor below her. I felt frozen in place, but in a split second she was suddenly closer, like maybe just a few feet from me. I have no clue how she got there so fast. I booked it out of there, grabbed Cooper, and ran out of the house and into my car. I calmed myself down, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. We waited in my car until the owner got home. Safe to say, they didn't book me again after that. Fast forward a couple months after I took a break from any kind of pet sitting and kept to walking. It took some time before I felt comfortable alone in someone else's house again. This time, I was just walking 2 dogs around the neighborhood and then dropping the back off at home. Easy enough. Plus, double the dogs, double the pay. It was a good job. I leased them up and off we went. The house was close to a nearby park, and since it was a beautiful day and I had an hour, that's where we went. There were tons and tons of people and dogs walking around and playing. Now, before I go further, you're going to think I'm on drugs or something. I want to disclaim that no, I was not drunk or high. I give you my word that this happened exactly like I'm telling you, as strange as it may seem. Anyway, about 10 minutes into the walk, the sounds around me began to slowly fade away. The voices, the barking, the laughing, even the birds chirping. like someone was turning the volume down until it was completely mute. The two dogs I was walking stopped in their tracks. I tugged a bit, whistling to them, jumping at the sheer volume of my own voice. While I looked at them, they were completely still, both of their heads turned perfectly sideways. And by sideways, I mean completely sideways. It looked like they had broken their necks, one ear facing the sky, the other toward the grass. Panicking, I looked around. Every single person in the park that I could see was frozen in place, heads turned sideways. They all stood there, sickeningly quiet, for what felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it happened, their heads snapped back into place, and the sounds of the world started up again. Everyone continued to walk and laugh. Dogs continued to play, my dogs continued to walk. I was covered in sweat, my throat dry. I didn't know what to do. The dogs pulled me along, and I just kept going. I've never told anyone this story, mostly because after they hear the first one they think I'm full of shit. I don't know if I'm actually crazy or just unlucky, but I have even more stories like this that I can't explain. You all probably think I'm off my rocker, but for those who do believe me, it feels good to finally get this off my chest. Thanks for letting me sit here and ramble on about my weird days as a dog walker. Second story. Dogman encounter during camping trip. Hello, my name is Shaggy Satter, but you can call me Shaggy for short. I'm going to recant a story of mine that I tell rarely. My own family don't even know about this, and while that might sound weird to you, trust me, it makes more sense to tell internet strangers than the people I'm forced to be around. Mr. X Dreams, an amazing narrator, once read this story for his channel, and I'm happy with the discussion it got. But I believe it's time to rewrite the story to clear up confusions. So without further explanation, let me get into my story. This happened when I was much younger. I'd have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was, but I can assure you it was at least a decade. Now I'm going to use some questionable words for describing the location. Words like wooded and wilderness reserve because I don't know the best words for this thing. Around a decade ago, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this was my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yes. Up until that point, I had only camped rarely. So the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed absolutely amazing. So we began preparing for a weekend when I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, and my own supplies. Once all that was gathered, the father of the friend came and picked me up, and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember from that trip. The amazingly hostile yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, and the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in, at least not so far as I know. But Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice, even if the best are always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know nobody thinks of multitudes of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to just use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So anyways, we found ourselves a plot and began setting up our tents. By afternoon, the tents were set, and me and my friend ditched his oh-so-boring younger sister in favor of exploring the park. The memories are fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink from the water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was very sandy. We watched a roadrunner doing its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day, I never would have thought anything could go wrong. We finished the day like you always do, by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary, probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister was an even younger child, and his father was lead singer at our church, and making children cry was bad for reputation. So by ghost stories, I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyways, shortly after the stories were said and s'mores were eaten, we retired, me to my tent and my friend, his father, and his sister to their tent. Now for this setup, I'll explain positioning. This is all going to be important. My tent was at one edge of the plot, and my friend's tent was at the exact opposite. This was for privacy reasons. Now on my end of the plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also about 3 feet from my tent was a little tree. What kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance. The lake was behind it, and a thin tree line sat across a trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So I went to bed without a single bit of fear, and before I did, I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside my tent because of laziness. Screw the 2-minute walk to the bathrooms when nature's toilet was outside my tent. So I finished closing up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke I had to use the bathroom, and it wasn't the kind of pottying I could do on a tree, or at least not reasonably. So I, not being a moron who'd wander through the dark, grabbed my little lantern. I flipped on my LED lantern and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent before the outer, as if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now I should mention that outside of cities in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyote howls. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan, you can hear the howl from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in a house. But when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you, and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap, I did hear a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was a very loud howl from the direction of the lake, about a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different, though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper, and it lasted longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there breathing hard with my fingers still grasping the zipper. But however long it may have been was just long enough for the thing that made that howl to come up the trail next to my tent. Suddenly, I heard the crunching of claws on dirt, and after that, claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that little kid me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily in the direction of the sparse tree line, where I assumed the other howling had come from. But before it got past the tree, I urinated on it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heaving breathing. By then it was too late, as that hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as the little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I like to note a few very important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote, but that classic DOGMAN head shape with the tiny pointed ears too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent. Popping sounds like joints rubbing together, as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obviously frightened kid me in my tent as it sniffed the tree I had urinated on. The breaths were similar to a dog's, but longer and far deeper, almost like a horse's. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow. They didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all the things I saw in those eyes, I saw a predator. Have you ever been in a position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know could just slaughter you, and you know it knows you know. Just looking for seemingly so damn long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubt a gun would even hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite the dread of knowing it was predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead, it turned slowly, ever so slowly, and just fucking sprinted off into the woods. Just fucking gone into the night faster than it came. I have one personal friend who knows, and he jokes that maybe it was my piss on that tree. Like I marked my territory or something dumb like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry. Or most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have, I might not, but if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. While they did hear the howling, they told me they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it, as if I was a city kid who had never heard coyote howling before. That next day, I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow the safety I had been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind, until we found tracks in that super sandy place. Coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just some dream, and because of that I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent. Even in the comfort of a warmer tent, more people means more warmth, and in the presence of an adult, the father, and two other people, friend and his sister, I couldn't sleep that night. I nearly drifted asleep, and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day, I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or two early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer, but also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then, I'm never comfortable, always listening for strange noises and acting paranoid. This really fucked me up, I guess, being forced to see that a human top of the food chain is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make everyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today, when I think about this, I remember two things first. Those eyes and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers up my spine. That said, you might be asking why I'm talking about this again if it terrifies me so much. Simple. I both want answers, and I want to add to the conversation. I feel the need to add this encounter so that others can experience it, maybe contact me with questions or answers. So let me say now that if you have any idea what happened that night, please respond or DM. If you have any questions, go ahead and do the same. Third story. I used to walk dogs. My name is Wyatt, and I need to get this out. A few years back, I got a job advertisement. Animal care assistant, no experience required. Being fresh out of college with minimal job prospects, I thought this would be a perfect chance. Ever since I was a kid, I cared for animals. Cooper, our golden retriever, was my best friend. We got him when I was 9 for the next decade. We were practically inseparable. However, when I was getting ready to go to college, Cooper was diagnosed with hemangiosarcoma, a very common dog cancer. I was heartbroken, and I refused to let him go alone. When they put him to sleep, I refused to leave him alone. I practically had to grapple with my dad to not make me leave him. But I stayed. I looked him in the eyes as the vet gave him the sedative to help him stop squirming as they put him down. I kept his ashes in a little locket, which I pinned to my backpack all through college. It felt as if he was there dutifully walking beside me through the labors of academia. But when I saw the ad, I put in the application and got a call. A gruff man's voice asked, "Is this Mr. Kelly?" "Yes," I responded. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m., I've emailed you the address of the shelter. We want you to get to know the rest of the staff before you start," the voice curtly ordered. Before I could respond, the voice hung up. So I guess this guy was to be my boss. The next day, I took the bus to the big concrete building at the edge of town. St. Francis Shelter. I thought that name was kind of weird. Don't they usually name hospitals after saints? I pulled my bag up on my shoulders, hearing the charm, with Cooper in a jingle. I took a deep breath and opened the doors to the shelter. A thin woman behind the desk in the spacious lobby stood from her chair and greeted me. "Hello there, welcome to St. Francis. Can I ask what brings you in today?" The woman, who based on her name tag was named Margaret. "Oh, hi, my name is Wyatt. A man called me yesterday to ask me to come in for the new position," I said, but before I could continue, the woman cut me off. "Oh yeah, the major is in the locker room, but I'll give you a tour of the facility," Margaret cheerily said. "Major?" I asked. "The major, he's one of the people who manage the facility. Most of the staff are veterans," Margaret said. after leading me through a bunch of rooms and corridors of white painted concrete. Then we enter the kennel. Rows and rows of cages, some of them stacked on top of each other. It looked like one of those commercials. You'd see they looked at me so sadly. And that's when I finally crystallized the main question I had. There are no other animals, just dogs. Usually animal shelters have a mix of animals, but this was just dogs. But I walked past the kennel, and that's when I noticed another odd thing. The dogs were all big. No Shih Tzus or pugs. The smallest thing I saw was some big pit mix. And they all looked like rescues. Most of them had scars, bruises, ripped ears, a few were missing eyes. They all looked right out of one of those commercials where you see all the sad animals and then the shelter begs you for money. The major likes to take in dogs that have the least chance of adoption. We try to make them healthy and comfortable even if they don't have anywhere to go, Margaret said as she seemed to notice my confusion. My guess, he just sees himself in them. She continued as she opened the other steel door at the end of the kennel. That led to a T-shaped split in the hallway. At one end was a set of wooden double doors, and on the other end was a locked-up metal door. It looked more like a bank vault door with heavy metal locks and a swipe card slot. That's the secure section. It's where we keep paperwork and records, Margaret said as she led me to the big set of doors. I looked up at the plaque on the door, and it read, "Quiet room, please be respectful. L." I suddenly was taken back to a similar sign I saw in the vet where I said goodbye to my best friend. As we began to open the doors, I heard a loud click and slam as the secure section door slammed shut. "Hey, Marge, this the new guy?" a voice from behind exclaimed. I turned around to be met with a man a few years older than me, maybe 28. "Hi, my name's Wyatt. Who are you?" I asked, reaching out my hand. "I'm Will said as he walked up and shook my hand. "Hey, well, let's talk later. Time to go bring Wyatt to meet the major," Margaret said as she gently began leading me back down the hall back to the kennel. Margaret led me back through the kennel to the lobby where a tall, bald, muscular man, maybe in his 50s, stood leaning against the counter. Once he turned to face me and I got a better look at him, I noticed something odd. He was covered in scars, cuts across his face, and burn marks on his arm. I tried my best not to stare, but it was grisly to say the least. "Hello, young man, my name is David Marster, but most people call me Major," the major said as he looked me up and down. "Yes, sir, my name is—" The major cut me off. "Wyatt," the major said as he picked up a clipboard and a pen. "Sir, may I ask what my responsibilities would be if I worked here?" I asked. "Well, Wyatt, you'll be our new dog walker," the major said as he pushed me the clipboard and pen. I looked the paper up and down. It was an employee contract. At the bottom, there was a spot for me to sign. With a quick flick of a wrist, I sold my soul. The major filled me in on my job with just how many dogs they have here. They need someone to take them out daily, so I take the dogs in groups of 2 to 4 and walk around town. Specifically, the major requested I take the old and sick dogs into the woods behind a shelter and walk them around the lake so they could get a last moment of glory before being put to sleep. It was so odd the dogs always pulled and tugged as I walked them. There was this big mean-looking pit named Gage who would always seem to stop and look at this same building every time. An old-style blue house not far from the shelter. He didn't even run or would try to run. He would just sit and stare up at the house, his pure massive body weight slowing me down as I pulled, and eventually after coaxing, he would eventually get up and with a little less pep in his step would walk along with me. A lot of the dogs had odd behaviors like that they'd randomly stop and stare at places and people. It was weird. It wasn't like they suddenly wanted to run off. But if I knew if I had that Great Dane Gary and we'd walk past the restaurant downtown, he would stop playing himself and not move until I practically dragged him to his feet. The first odd experience I had was one time I finished my last rounds, took the dogs back to their cages, and began locking them up. As I was finishing lockup, I heard the squeal of rubber in the parking lot. I put the last of my group of German shepherd named Harvey and walked out to the lobby to see what was going on. A group of about 6 big pickup trucks pulled into the parking lot, not seeming to care about the lines painted on the asphalt. Out of the trucks came about a dozen tall, burly men dressed in all black. Most of them were in what looked like surplus clothes, and they all carried heavy duffel bags slung over their shoulder. The major walked past me and went to greet the men. Before he walked out the door, I asked, "Who are those guys?" "Night shift." The major calmly responded as he went out to greet them. The night shift guys were odd. They spoke very little, and the minimum they did say would mostly consist of them telling you to get out of their way. They only seemed to have any friendly conversation with each other and the major. That was another odd thing I picked up on. Did the major live here? He never seemed to leave. I'd come in for work at 9 in the morning, and he'd already be here. Then when I'd be getting ready to go at 5 and the night shift staff was coming in, he would stay with them. I never once saw him outside of the shelter. Maybe he was just incredibly dedicated. That's at least what I thought then. One time I asked the major, "Why do you have so much more staff at night than during the day?" "The dogs can be more easily spooked at night. It's good to have some more people there," the major curtly responded. But that was my life. Keep your eyes down, do what the major said, walk the dogs. Get paid. The pay was pretty good in all honesty. Looking back on it, of experiences I should have probably paid more attention to. One time I was walking Gage the pit when we passed the house. He, as per usual, stopped, sat, and didn't want to move. "Oh, come on, Gage, not this again," I pleaded as I pulled on his leash. That's when the door opened. A woman about my age walked out the front door, tapping on her phone. That's when Gage went ballistic. He didn't bark, but he pulled and pulled like he wanted to get closer to her. She looked up from her phone and saw me feebly pulling on his lead, trying to get him to go further down the street. "Oh, who's this?" she said as she walked over to pet Gage. "This is Gage. Sorry about him. He must like you," I said as Gage nuzzled her hand and sniffed her. "Oh, it's no issue," she said as she scratched behind Gage's ears to his delight. "I'm sorry, my name is Wyatt," I said as I attempted to reach out a hand as all the dogs pulled in different directions. "Sandra," she said as she managed to shake my struggling hand. "Well, I better get back to work. Sorry about him again," I said as I began to walk off. Gage was not having any of this. He did not want to go. He started yowling and barking like someone was trying to kill him. As Sandra walked away, he eventually caved and followed me. I stopped and kneeled to him. "Hey, buddy, look, we'll try to stop here again if she is here, but I need you to work with me. Can you do that, big guy?" I said as I rubbed behind his ears. As we were walking away, I swear I heard something from behind me, like someone whispering into the wind as it passed by your ear. "And you?" I looked back, but all I saw was Gage staring at me as he slowly trotted along. I had just finished my walks, and I was putting the dogs back in their cages, when I heard a shout from down the hall, like a panic scream. I ran in case someone was hurt, but it was so bizarre I didn't recognize the voice anywhere. "Please, no, please, please don't hurt me." The voice pleaded before seemingly morphing into a sound that sounded like one part begging and one part whining. I went into the split, and it was coming from the quiet room. I walked up and tried the handle, but it was locked. A few more moments of grunting and moaning before Will and the major pushed out of the room, and Will held a bloody rag over his arm. "What did you get bit?" the major barked at him. "No, he just scratched me," Will pleaded. I looked past them to see the unmoving body of a German shepherd hunter laying, his eyes pointed towards the door, seemingly looking at me. "Well, don't lie to me. Did you get bit?" the major said as he slammed Will against the wall. Will looked down away from the major. Wordlessly, the major grabbed him and led him towards the security door. As I walked behind them, my mind swam with questions. First of which was, who was that? It wasn't Will or the major. The voice sounded weak and pathetic, as if it was groveling. "Sir, what's going on? Should I get first aid?" I went to ask before I was sharply cut off by the major. "Wyatt, stay back. Will might be sick," the major ordered. "Okay, sir, should I dial 911? I asked as I took a step back. "And oh, just wait here," the major said as he pushed Will through the security door. I looked past them to see into the secure room. That's the thing, though, there wasn't a room, it was just a stairwell. Leading down, Will flew forward, tripping over himself and falling at the top of the stairs. The major looked at me with a paternal demand, and then threw the heavy security door shut with an unexpected strength. I stood there frozen. I didn't know what to do. I slowly backed away from the door and went back to the kennel. As soon as I opened the doors, the dog all looked at me. It was bizarre. It was as if they were privy to something I wasn't. The usual barks and huffs I'd hear expecting walks or treats or anything. They just stood and followed me with their gaze as I walked down the hall. As I opened the door to walk out to the lobby, I heard something behind me. Help us. The voice sounded wrong, as if it were coming out of a misshaped voice box. I spun around to see who had spoken, but when I looked back, it was just the procession of canines. I quickly pulled open the door and stepped out to the lobby. Margaret was sat at the desk and looked up at me worried. "What happened?" she asked. "Well, got bit," I said, stammering. She just looked down with this grim look on her face, as if I just told her he died. "Yeah, it's crazy." The major freaked out about it and took him into the secure room. I continued, wiping the sweat from my forehead. She looked at me and cocked her head, confused, as if getting ready to explain a joke to me. Suddenly her eyes went wide, and she looked away from me. "Yeah, the major takes running this place very seriously," she said, trying to stifle some emotion. Suddenly the door flew open, and the major walked into the lobby. He had some cuts and bruises like he had just gotten into a scuffle. "You all right, boss?" Margaret said as she grabbed the first aid kit from under the desk. He waved his hand as if to say he was O.K. The next day, I came in, and where it would normally be just Margaret waiting for me, the major was standing there at the desk. As soon as I stepped through the door, he started. "Will is sick and probably going to be out for a while," the major said as he headed for the door. "We'll never come back. At least not in the way he was expecting." A week later, I arrived, and one of the night shift trucks was parked out front. The major and the night shift guys were pulling cages from the bed of the truck and loading them inside. "Oh, Wyatt, you're here. Grab a crate if you need one of the guys to help. Don't be afraid to ask," the major said as he pulled a cage with a husky in it off of the truck. I managed to struggle and pull a cage with a black lab inside it. I looked at the collar as I picked up the cage. Willie. The dog made eye contact with me, which was also something odd about the dogs. They always made eye contact with me. I looked it up one time, and apparently, dogs make eye contact with people they trust, so I guess I must be on their good side. But when Willie looked at me, he seemed calm. Before he was scared, shaking like a leaf. But he slowed down and eventually calmed down. Made carrying his cage a lot easier. After a few hours of loading and intake, such as making sure all of the dogs had their shots and checking for any tracking chips, I was left alone in the kennel room. Suddenly, as I was getting ready to walk out the door, I heard a moaning and groaning noise, like one of the dogs was in pain. I ran across the room to see what was happening, and Willie was rolling around as if he was in agony. The other dogs were all barking and screaming and howling in a mix of fear and reverence. A canine chorus of demons heralding their fanged king. He writhed, making horrible howling and groaning noises. I went to run to get help, but I heard a voice shout. And oh, the voice scream-howled at me. I ran back to see Willie had begun to change, as if his muscles were moving under his skin. His bones snapped and his joints dislocated. He slowly began to shift to a shape more like that of a man. The dog's teeth seemed to retract into his head, sliding under his skin like some kind of parasite. Human hands pushed through the front paws as the paw pad slid under his fingernails. The same happened as his legs violently snapped into a straight shape like a human leg. His ears slid down his head and retracted into his head like someone pulling a sock into his head. The horrible, breaking, sloughing, and groaning froze me against the wall. After what felt like hours, he sat on the floor of the cage, sweating, panting, bruised and beaten. It was Will. I stood there in shock and confusion. "Wyatt, you need to run," he panted as he reached out to grab the doors. I wasn't going to leave him behind. I grabbed the keys and began trying to find the one for this cage. Will slammed his hand on the door, rattling it. "Get out of here, Wyatt," he barked at me. "The major can't see you, no." Just then the door swung open and the major and one of the night shift guys carrying a rifle entered. I don't know much about guns, but it looked like a military-style rifle. The kind you'd see a bad guy in an action movie use. Before I could say a word, the gun was pointed at me. My hand shot up, and I began slowly backing away. "Did he bite you?" the major asked calmly. "No," I said, backing up against the door behind me. The major drew a taser and shot while he screamed and shouted in pain. As I looked over at him, the man, with the rifle, swung the stock of it, hitting me in the head. My memory gets a little foggy from here. I fell backward through the door and slammed my head against the concrete wall before hitting the ground. I heard the major yelling at the man and then stepping over me. I remember them grabbing my legs and dragging me towards the security door, and that's when I blacked out. I woke up, my head was pounding, I was cold, and I felt my skin touching something metal. I was bruised, and I was handcuffed behind my arms and chained to a chair with heavy iron chains. I opened my eyes, and I saw a dark, wide open room. I wanted to scream, but I had a muzzle belted over my mouth. I realized the cold feeling. I felt I was nude sitting in a metal chair. I panicked, looking around, and saw another chair across from me. What was tied to another chair with a similar setup. I looked around. There were 2 cages in the room, one on each end. Suddenly, a door swung open, and the major stood in the doorway. I saw several figures watching through a large bulletproof window next to the door. "I like you, Wyatt. You're hardworking, bright, and most importantly, obedient," the major said as he stepped into the room. "I think you have some serious upward mobility in this industry," he said as he continued walking towards me. "And we inspected you for bites. Seems you were telling the truth, but I feel like you need a demonstration just so you can understand exactly what we do here," he said as he drew a pistol from a holster on his belt. I tried to scream and beg, but I couldn't make a sound. He pointed the pistol at me for a moment, before suddenly turning the gun and shot Will 3 times in the chest. He groaned in pain as the bullets ripped into his flesh. But in a moment of inhuman horror, he began howling and screaming as the hot metal lodged in his chest slowly pushed backward and fell out of his flesh and into his lap. "You understand, Wyatt, that men need to manage the dogs," the major said as he stowed the pistol and drew a large knife. 60%, that seems to be the magic number," the major said as he examined the knife. In one quick, fluid motion, he slashed Will's throat. It was like a hot knife through butter. Will gargled in pain as the new hole in his neck bubbled with his screaming, spurting blood out and all over the floor. The blood seemed to pour out his neck like crimson rainfall. He attempted to scream, but all that was heard was a wet spray as his supernatural flesh folded and flapped. The major turned around and wiped the knife with a rag. He threw the rag to the side and slid the knife back into the sheath on his belt. "Look, Wyatt, you need to understand how serious this is. These animals are dangerous," the major said as he walked over and kneeled before me. "But a man needs to make money," he said. "Sometimes people will pay good money to see these dogs show their strength," he said as I looked at the dried blood all over the floor. "Regular dog fighting isn't interesting anymore, but when we discovered these things, suddenly clients were far more willing to bet and pay to watch," he said as he looked around the room. "Unfortunately, Will was not a planned candidate. Usually we just find people who get infected and put them to work," the major said as he looked over at Will Body.Y. I looked past the major and saw Will's body. His flesh was rapidly breaking down, but under his skin was not just his regular shape. As his flesh began to melt, the bones and claws and teeth of his dog's body began to leak out. Bloody, fleshy paw pads fell on the ground. His face sloughed off as the bones of his canine jaw and his human skull fused as he slumped down. The major pulled off the muzzle and began to uncuff me and started to unwrap the chains holding me down. Part of me went a run, part of me just stayed still. The second part won, and I just slumped limply. The door swung open, and one of the night shift guys asked, "He all good?" "Yeah, get him his clothes." The major ordered the man in the doorway. "Hey, Wyatt, take a few days off, and then we can talk about your new position in the company," the major said as he patted his hand on my shoulder before he walked away. I sat there staring at the pile of bones, goo, blood, and melted flesh. He looked like someone had thrown a human skeleton and a dog skeleton in a tank of dark red molten wax. The guy brought in the shirt and jeans was wearing. I hollowly put on my clothes. My body moved, but my soul was trapped. My spirit was still chained to that chair. I wandered into the room where the night shift group was sitting around. I turned around and looked through the window. The large concrete basement had several floodlights set up, and a set of chains attached to each end of the room. I limped through the doorway into a staircase going up. With every step, I felt my guilt weigh me down more. By the time I made it to the top of the stairs, I slowly pushed open the security door. I was in the hall. Across from me was the quiet room. I realized what it all meant. These animals have been taking care of their people. I had to walk through what I thought was a kennel, but was actually a prison. I stood there attempting to brace myself for their accusing eyes. I slowly opened the door, and their eyes were all glued to me. They looked with a mixture of pathetic begging and accusatory judgment. I thought is that why they always seemed off and why they stared too long. I thought I was doing a kindness, caring for those who have no one else to depend on. I was never their caretaker. I was just another jailer. I looked down in shame and walked out the door. Margaret was in the front room, and she went to say something, but I walked out into the bitter cold night. I know I should have found a ride or found a way to get home. It was too late for the bus to be running, so I walked back to my apartment. I fell into bed and just laid there. I had no idea what to do. My mind had just been opened to something I could never understand. It felt like I was damned. What do I do now? What happened to these people? Why did I have to be part of this? What sickos were funding this? I barely moved for a few days as I let the world spin around me. Eventually, around noon on the third day, I got a text from a major. Meet this evening time, you get your promotion. I didn't say a word. I just slowly got up and got dressed. I could work from inside to see if I can find a vulnerability in their system. I would set them free. I arrived at the shelter as the sun began to sneak below the horizon. The major waited outside for me. It was the first time I had seen him smile. He pushed open the glass door, and sitting on the counter was a plastic card. Wyatt Harris, assistant caretaker. The major patted me on the back and handed me the card. Making your way up in the world, he said as he set another item on the counter. A taser with a leather holster. The yellow plastic perfectly fit in my hand as I clipped the holster onto my belt. They seem to hate a shock, so if you're in a bad spot, this can give you a few moments to get out, the major said as he patted me on the shoulder. I slowly nodded and asked, "So what am I up to now?" I asked. The major looked to the left and the right. "Now you help keep the entertainment going." We walked into the secure room. The major turned his body so I couldn't see the keypad as he tapped the buttons. Eventually, with a loud beep, the door opened. I walked down the stairs with the major through the door into the observation room. 2 cages covered with sheets sat in the concrete room. I looked up and saw people. Sitting in stands above the open room were dozens of people. I couldn't make out their faces, but they seemed to be getting into the stands and sitting to watch. Now I got what the major meant by entertainment. 2 of the guys pulled the sheets off of the cages, and sitting inside was 2 people. 2 naked scarred men sat on the floor. The major hit the button on a PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, place your bets tonight, Bot Colt versus Cooper," he said as he pulled a chair for me to sit. I sat down, and before me was a console of buttons. The 2 other guys inside the room who pulled the sheets came back into the control room and took seats. The major pointed at a button for me to hit. I slowly pressed the button, and the front gates off of the cages slowly lifted, opening the fronts of the cages. But they didn't move. They didn't budge. They looked pleadingly at each other, as if begging for us to let them go. The major pointed down at the console, and there was a sticky note with a lightning bolt over a large red button. I stared down at it as the major began barking orders at me to hit the button, but I hesitated. However, before I could say anything, the major slammed the button, and the 2 men convulsed as they were shocked. They screamed and howled as their bodies began to shift and change. Their skin split and muscle pushed through. Their bodies shifted as the animals took over. But they stopped halfway. Their bodies were turned into fleshy half-melted dogmen. Their bodies looked like they were made out of molten wax that had been flash frozen into a canine human shape. The muscular and fanged bodies slowly stalked out of the cages. They ripped into each other. Their bodies began reforming and regenerating as their bodies immediately began healing as they ripped off chunks of flesh. And this was my life for the next few weeks. I walked dogs during the day and facilitated their torture at night. They battled each other and grappled, but none of them got to die. They would all just come back. After one temporarily would collapse, we would electrocute them into submission, then dump them back into the kennel as their bodies would slowly reform into their dog shape. Eventually, the major stopped hiding the code from me. I saw where he kept his keys. I ultimately had a plan. All I needed to do was release the dogs. One day, the golden opportunity suddenly opened one day for me. We were bringing in 2 dogs to do another match, Gage and Bandit. All of the employees with the rifles and cattle prods stood around waiting for seemingly anything to go wrong. And as we were closing the cages, the door mechanism broke and dropped the heavy metal door on the major's foot. He screamed and howled in pain. But the moment the door jammed and wouldn't close, it happened. Suddenly, Gage's giant clawed hand lurched out and grabbed at the major. The major screamed and pulled his pistol, firing wildly into the cage. I took this as my moment. I jumped onto the major, knocking him to the ground. He screamed, "Get thee off me." I popped the button on his belt and snatched his keyring. As I jumped up and ran, I heard several cracks as bullets passed me, hitting the concrete walls. I threw the door open and looked over at the control panel. I slammed the door behind me, locking it. The night shift guards began firing into the cages at the dogmen inside. I looked down at the control panel and just started smashing buttons. The electric mechanisms whirred and ground as the cage doors began opening. The giant monsters began ripping into the men. The predatory fury splattered against the bulletproof glass. One of the beasts paused and looked at me through the window. Gage. He paused for a moment before returning to the slaughter, like he was thanking me for my part. I ran upstairs through the secure room and went into the kennel. The dogs were all silent. They stared blankly at me. I quickly got to work opening the cages, though they still didn't move. I ripped the doors open and stepped into the doorway, into the lobby. The dogs didn't move, just stared, though suddenly they looked toward the hallway across from me. Then I heard it, crashing. They made it through the first door. They're coming upstairs. I ran into the lobby, and as I was about to run out the glass door, I heard it, the clicking of a revolver. I turned and Margaret stood holding the gun. She opened her mouth to speak as the furred tide poured out of the door. All of them ran free, jumping atop her, ripping her to shreds, leaving her a pile of bone and mush. Then it was my turn. I may have opened the doors, but I still jailed them. They ran, knocking me to the ground and shattering the glass of the building. They attacked me, clawing and slashing into me. But they decided to be merciful, leaving me lying on the ground, bleeding and wheezing. I lay there, still holding on, falling in and out of consciousness. Eventually, the police arrived to find me. I was rushed to the hospital. After a few days of questions and tests, I was sent home. Now comes the reason I'm posting this. One of them bit me. I don't remember which one, but ever since then I've felt different. I keep blacking out and waking up, and I can hear them, barking, growling, howling. I can feel their nails, scratching at the inside of my skin. I can see the bones sliding under my muscles. I clawed my nails off on my floorboards to try and get them out. My bleeding fingernails pushed out to reveal claws. I've been sitting here feeling it. As the ribbons of my flesh begin slowly sloughing off my body, I feel it coming. My mind is slipping. My new instincts are slowly taking over. I'm so hungry. I already tried to swallow pills, slice open my wrists, something. I need to find silver. But I'm so hungry. Fourth story. The hunt for the South Slope Dogman. The following is the account of Captain Collins, a now missing member of the Pascate Rangers and the leader of the now defunct Ranger Squadron 3, commonly known as the Night Crawlers. The following document is being made public under the auspices of Project Blackfeather, in an attempt to bring to light the dangerous and irresponsible activities of one Godwin Sinclair and his ring of associates operating out of Ravenhead, Alberta. The archivist. 2 townspeople went missing last week. We found one of the bodies just off the South Slope Road a few days ago, mauled all to hell, so much so we couldn't even tell which of the 2 missing people it was. The other one still hasn't been found yet, but with the reports of half howls, half-human screams from the edge of town. I'm guessing we're not going to find him. Sinclair and his acolytes think some kind of lycanthrope or monstrous animal that's left the forest behind. Command told us to get ready either way. We're heading out for the ranging tomorrow and plan to be back within a week. I'll be leading the night crawlers up the western side of the valley. The headless men will have the east, and the Ironsides will be going up the center before both of us, trying to flush whatever this thing is outwards towards one of us. Orders are to capture, but we have freedom to kill if capture is untenable. I'm no stranger to hunting down monsters at this point, but the night before a ranging is always the worst. You never know who's coming back or what state they'll be in. Sinclair sent us a nice rich dinner and some wine from his personal stores, though. I suppose it's nice, but it almost feels like a last meal before an execution. The team is excited, and I suppose I will be too once I'm in the field and adrenaline is flowing. It'll be the last night I get to sleep in a real bed for the next week, or forever, maybe. Can't wait to sleep on the forest floor and wake up stiff and cold with pine needles in my ass. Bedtime. We were up before the sun, armed and kit within an hour, and all three teams were assembled in the yard, where the Master Ranger met us and briefed us again on the situation. Remember, Ironsides are to stay ahead of the entire line. Keep noisy and keep loud. We want this thing flushed towards the edges of the valley where the flanks can pick it up. Captains, keep frequent contact with one another. Don't break formation. If you can drive this thing across the lay, Collins, you, and the night crawlers will go on alone, while the others hold the riverbank in case it loops back. Understood, the old ranger said. Got it, I called, adding my voice to the chorus of acceptance that arose from the assembled group. Good, now get out of here. I want a report from each captain every night. The three teams marched out of the yard and reached Ravenhead after almost an hour. We passed through the town on the way to the South Slope Road, and a few of the townspeople who were just beginning to stir waved at us or called a good luck out of their windows. The headless men broke off first to hold the east, and it was only us and the Ironsides until they broke off a few hours later. Being the furthest from the staging ground, we were the last to reach position and spread out into a lone staggered line. This close to Ravenhead, the Pascate forest has been cut back, leaving only rolling hills of grass and a few scattered assortments of trees and scrub. Ahead of us, as we spread out across the valley, loomed the tall and ancient trees of Pascate. Pine trees grew taller here than they did anywhere else in the world, but that's probably the least strange thing you'll find in this valley. Night crawlers in position, over. I spoke into my radio. Ironsides in position, over. Crackled a voice from the radio. Headless men ready to range, over. Came a second voice. Ironsides moving out. Give us an hour and get walking. I switched to the radio channel for my squadron and told them we had an hour to kill. So hold position and keep an eye on the tree line. I set my backpack down on the ground and propped my rifle against it. I pulled a cigarette out from one of my jacket pockets and lit it, the iron smoke filling my lungs and fully waking me up. I looked down the line and saw the smoke rising off a few other cigarettes. I shook my legs out and sat down on the grass, leaning against my bag. Even though I've been in them for years, there's still something off-putting about the Pascate Forest. Well, it's literally home to monsters, so I suppose that's a stupid thing to say. The trees themselves, though, the ground, the bushes, everything is just off somehow. I've never been great with words, but I guess the forest just gives off a bad vibe. Well, whatever. This is a ranging log, not a journal. Who cares what I think? We sat for an hour smoking and checking our guns over when the call came from the Ironsides to start moving. The captain of the Headless Men and I both confirmed we were moving, and I signaled my rangers forward. I was on the far right of the line, and we were spread out so that I could just make out the ranger to my left, enough to cover extra ground, but not too far away if one of us found something. It's slow going when you're trying to flush something out, especially when it could be some sort of man-eating beast, so we weren't covering much ground. The whole first day passed uneventfully. One of my rangers found a footprint that turned out to just be a regular wolf. One of the Headless Men shot a deer accidentally. living up to their call sign, and I could hear the clamor of the Ironsides even from an hour ahead of us. Their shouting and banging echoing through the dark forest as they try to flush an angry monster right onto us. We each paired up with the man to our left and lit a fire, sleeping in shifts through the night, so we could keep watch along with a line of fires running through the woods, which would hopefully keep our prey to the north of us. Sleep is easy to find when you've been walking with a full pack all day, but hard to rouse yourself out of. I had the first watch, so I at least had the chance to sleep until sunrise, when my partner nudged me awake with his boot and handed me a mess tin of eggs, bread, and bacon. I ate quickly and washed it down with some of the coffee that had been boiling over the fire. Warm and awake, we kicked our fire out and covered up our tracks, spacing back out to our positions in the line. The voice of the Ironsides captain echoed from my radio, instructing all squads to begin moving. I passed the message down the line, and we began walking again. Even at the height of midday, not much light penetrates through the canopy of Passgate, leaving us in a largely dusky state of lighting. We called a halt around 1 o'clock, which allowed us to eat a quick lunch before we kept moving. It had been a few hours when I noticed that all of a sudden the forest had gone quiet. The Ironsides weren't making a racket anymore. Before I had a chance to think about it, a voice spoke from my radio. All units halt. Ironsides has potential contact. Ready weapons. Over. Night crawlers read you. Over. Headless men holding. Over. The forest was dead, silent aside from the clack of rifles being readied that drifted towards me from down the line. Even the birds and the critters of the forest were silent. We're dealing with something bad, I whispered to myself. The silence didn't last long, as a moment later the forest erupted with the sounds of gunfire far ahead. I immediately dropped behind the trunk of a nearby tree and peeked out towards the sound of the firefight going on. Unlike us, the Ironsides carried automatic weapons and way more ammunition. They were the heavy hitters of the Ranger units, and you could hear why. The blaze of guns lasted for maybe a minute before the forest fell back to eerie silence. Target is moving north towards the ley. Over. Captain Ironsides said through the radio. Did you get visual? Over. Captain Headless replied. Barely. Whatever it is, it's big. Bipedal, humanoid, dark fur. Nothing more than that. Moves damn fast. Ironsides in pursuit. Both of you move your units up closer in case it doubles back. Over. Copy. Over. I said and radioed to my team to make double pace through the woods. We set off on a light jog forward, guns at the ready and packs growing heavier with every step. It took 2 hours before we were in position to the left of the Ironsides line, and the Headless men fell into position only a few minutes after us. A halt was called, and I radioed the Ironsides captain. How's the tracking? Over. It's still moving north as far as we can tell. Too late to pursue. Let's get a line of fires going across the valley and make sure it stays north of us. Extra caution tonight, everyone. Over. I relayed the message to my team, and we built our fires extra bright that night. I presumed that everyone would be as on edge as I was, but if they were, the ranger I was camping with didn't show a hint of fear. He fried up a quick dinner, and we ate in silence, ears alert to every small sound that came from the woods. I slept first that night, with my rifle loaded right next to me and my knife held close to my chest. Not that a knife ever did much good against the things we usually faced, but it made me feel better all the same. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by something that sounded like a human imitating the howling of a dog. It was piercingly loud, but seemed to be coming from a good distance off. The ranger on watch was already crouched, rifle at his shoulder, aimed off into the forest. He motioned for me to keep quiet and still, so I slowly, carefully picked my rifle off the ground and quickly scanned our perimeter. A moment later, the forest burst to life with the sound of a roar, a scream, and a clip of bullets being fired. My heart began to pound, the adrenaline was coursing through my blood, and I realized what I loved about being a ranger, the thrill. Me and my partner stood still as stone, guns trained towards the source of the sound. ears trained on everything else. After the initial commotion, all we could make out in the night was the sound of something crashing through the underbrush far away in the distance, followed by a deep howl half an hour later. One of our fires got hit. No casualties, one injured. Target's still heading north. Over. Ironside's captain barked through the radio, sounding out of breath. Get a good look at it? Over. I asked. Injured Ranger says 7 to 8 feet tall. Humanish, big teeth. Over. Nothing else? Over. He swears he emptied a clip right into it. We should be able to follow the blood come the morning. Over. I read. Over. I set the radio down next to my blanket, and the other Ranger nodded at me slightly. You got 2 more hours, he said, as he laid his rifle across his lap and leaned back against a tree to resume his watch. I nodded in response and faded back into sleep. I had the last shift of the watch and sat for 4 hours waiting for the sun to come up, gazing off into the darkness of the night and occasionally feeding the fire. I could see the lights of the other fires in the line shining through the darkness like distant fireflies. For some reason, something about being in the wilderness just makes me feel so empty. Not in a bad way, but more like emotions just flow in and out of me like a gentle creek without leaving a trace. Was I scared? I don't know. There's fear in me, that's for sure, but it almost feels like it isn't mine. It's like it's the fear of some ancient forgotten human who lived and hunted in the depths of the woods centuries ago, like an instinctual fear that exists because I'm human, so there's fear there, but it's not mine. The line got underway right at sunrise, all 3 units pushing forward at a reduced pace. Captain Ironsides was right. The beast was bleeding, not a lot, but enough to track it. It was moving quickly towards the lay, and we reached the banks of the river just before the sun went down. The lay divides Blackfeather Valley in half, somewhere around the middle. It's a freezing cold river. Well, more like a stream that tumbles out of the mountains and bisects the valley, cutting the Pascape Forest in the south from the Lake Wash Forest in the north. The Rangers have tried building small bridges across the lay in the past, but every time we do, something smashes it to bits. Rangers sent to guard the bridges never come back, so we gave up years ago and settled for fording the river when we need to cross. Captains Ironsides, Headless, and I met at the center of the Ranger line for a meeting before we proceeded. We were all sat around a blazing fire, drinking the crisp glacial water of the lay from camp mugs. I say dogman or werewolf. Ironside said, sound enough like one. Headless shrugged. Your man never got a good look? I asked. No, but the description is close enough. Besides, the howling after the attack is enough for me. Ironsides replied. The crawlers are ready to go over, I assume? Headless asked. Always. I nodded. The thing is wounded. I doubt it'll be that much of a problem. Ironsides said. I saw the blood trail. The wound looks superficial. Regardless, we'll rest up and go over in the morning. Can you 2 split all the watches between yourselves? I asked, getting to my feet and sticking my hands over the fire. The 2 other captains nodded. We move at dawn. I'll radio reports by the hour. I said as I returned to my Rangers and filled them in, telling them all to get a good sleep and eat well. As I curled up on my blanket next to a fire, I watched through half-shut eyes as the Ironside and Headless sentries began to patrol up and down the south bank of the lay. I fell into a fitful sleep that night, dreaming of my limbs being torn off by the jaws of some huge and horrific beast. I woke just before dawn, sweating like a pig. I splashed my face in the lay and readied my gear before I made my rounds and woke all the other night crawlers. All 12 of us were gathered at the point where the blood trail entered the lay, checking rifles and tightening our pack straps and clothes. Captains Ironside and Headless wished us all good luck, and we splashed across the river ford, plunging into the tree-line of the lake wash. 3 others and myself formed the main group, while 2 Rangers served as a vanguard, running ahead of us, 2 as a rear guard in the event we were followed, and a pair of 2 far off in the bush on our left and right. We spent the entire day on a small game trail, the The blood trail had begun to fade, but the prints of the beast were still noticeable. Huge, loping strides and massive paws with claws on the end, something that walked sometimes on 2 feet and sometimes on 4. As the sun was beginning to make its downward descent, the 2 rangers in the vanguard radioed in that there was a ranger station not too far ahead that we should be able to make just after sunset. We figured it would be nice to sleep on bunks and under a roof, so we decided to press on. Fully stocked, and no signs of the beast was the report from the van. The 2 flanking pairs returned to our main body, and the rear guard made double time to catch up with us. So 10 rangers made the station at the same time, about an hour after sunset. "Damn," said the man to my right. "Yeah," I murmured. In front of us, the 2 rangers who had been scouting ahead were laying slumped on the ground in front of the station in pools of their own blood. Guts and viscera had been strewn around the grounds, and one of the rangers was now a head and a leg less of a man than he had been that morning. Not even a shot fired or a radio call. Another ranger said, "Secure the building. Nobody outside until sunrise. 2 guard for the night at all times. Decide to shift yourself." I said, turning to the unit behind me, "We'll bury them in the morning." We filed inside and found the inside of the station untouched. It was a long log cabin filled with bunks and supplies, which had a ladder leading to an observation tower. We had built a number of these, scattered throughout the lake wash and the pass gate, but none were ever permanently occupied, typically just being places for us to restock and rest for a night when outranging. Nobody spoke that night. The station was dead silent aside from men tossing in their beds or the occasional snoring. We rose at dawn, buried the 2 dead rangers, and radioed the report back across the river. We searched the camp by the light of the sun, but could only find 1 set of beast tracks leading still further north, the prints caked with drying blood. How did one of these things, wounded, get a drop on 2 rangers? Someone asked. "I don't know," I replied. "But nobody separates from the main group now. We all stick together. Be ready to fire at any time." We took our hats off and saluted the 2 freshly dug graves before we began making our way north again, hot on the tracks of the beast. A sense of apprehension was growing inside me as the day wore on, and the forest remained still and silent, with still no sign of the beast aside from the trail we were following. We reached the Blackwater Lake at nightfall, the lake which the lake wash gets its name from, and camped uneventfully on its quiet shore. I could sense the men were growing uneasy the further we ranged from the lay, but nobody dared voice a complaint. When we woke that morning, there were 9 of us left. One of the sentries had vanished in the night. There were a few footprints at the edge of the camp, but they led straight into the Blackwater and never emerged again. The old lady of the lake got on. One of the men said over breakfast, but none of us replied or even acknowledged that anything had been spoken. We packed and moved on, casting a few lingering, furtive glances at the glassy, still surface of the Blackwater, and continued north. Halfway through the day, we had broken out of the northern treeline of the lake wash and were on the north slopes of the valley. The trail carried on, and it only took us an hour to find what we were looking for. Well, he made it pretty damn easy for us to find him. Came the voice of a ranger from behind me. All of us had our attention fixed forward at the gaping cave mouth in front of us. Hot air was drifting out of it, and blood and bones were scattered everywhere by the entrance, which seemed to have a layer of powdered bones coating the ground like a giant, horrible welcome mat. "All right, who's going in first?" I asked, and the men behind me laughed. Capturing the thing, there were explosives back at the station. I say we level the whole cave. One of the rangers said, and the others muttered and mumbled their agreement. For once I agree with you all. I don't think we're capturing this thing. I shrugged. "Max, you and me will go back with the explosives. The rest of you stay here and make sure it doesn't leave the cave." The men shifted uneasily and looked around at one another, hearing that most were meant to stay behind. "There's 7 of you and 1 of it, and you know exactly where it is. Don't worry about it. We're shooting fish in a barrel at this point," I said, as I reshouldered my pack and motioned for Max to follow me. Double time, we should be back in a day. Max and I set off, following our trail back to the station. We had entered the lake wash again and were a few hours away from the cave when my blood turned to ice as I heard the distant sounds of shouting, shooting, and howling. Max looked at me, and I locked eyes with him. I stopped and raised my radio up. "This is Captain Crawler. Does anyone read me? Status report. Over." The radio burst to life with the sound of screaming, hissing static, and gunshots. The man on the radio was yelling something incoherent at me, of which I could only make out one word, the one word I hadn't wanted to hear. "Pack." The line went dead, and I attempted twice more to radio to unit, to no response. Max was staring at me, stone-faced, silently gripping and relaxing his rifle over and over. "What do we do?" he asked. I stopped and thought for a moment. I looked back to where we had come from, and then back down the trail we were following. Same orders. We get the explosives and bury them. I ordered Max to dump any extra weight from his pack, and I did the same, throwing random equipment that I didn't think would come in handy onto the ground. We set off at a jog back down the trail again, thankful for the slightly lighter packs. We ran until well past sunset when our legs were burning and hunger clawed at my stomach. "Can you keep going without sleeping?" I asked as I wolfed down water and some canned beef. "For a few hours at least." Max replied. I nodded at him, and we picked our guns up and resumed running. It was near 3 in the morning when we stopped, and only because the trail had become too dangerous to run on in the dark. We had passed Blackwater and, in my estimation, would reach the station by noon tomorrow as long as we didn't sleep too long. 2 hours sleep. "I'll take first watch," I said, catching my breath and pointing at the ground behind Max. He didn't need to be told twice, and threw himself down, falling asleep immediately. I struggled to keep myself awake, pacing the perimeter of the clearing we were in and chain smoking the cigarettes I had left. I nudged Max awake after 2 hours, and I lay down, falling immediately asleep. I woke to the feel of sun on my face. That's not good, I thought to myself as I bolted upright from the ground. Max had fallen asleep against a tree. We had slept way longer than we should have. I got up and threw a splash of water into Max's face, waking him up at the start. "Get up," I yelled, at which Max jumped to his feet and lifted his gun. Without telling him, he grasped what had happened, as I could see the fear spreading subtly across his face. We began to run again, but after not 15 minutes heard a distant howl echo out of the forest far behind us. The fear is not mine. The fear is not mine. I repeated to myself mentally over and over as we ran. The howls were beginning to grow more frequent and even worse, closer, the longer we ran. By noon, I figured we were almost back to the station. That's when the howling broke out from far too close. I stopped where I was, turned, and cocked my rifle. "What are you doing?" Max yelled as he spun a look at me. "They're too close and too fast. We won't beat them running," I said through ragged breaths as I raised my gun to point into the woods. Max stopped, looked at me for a moment, and coming around to what I was saying, readied his rifle as well. A light mist was clinging to the floor of the lake wash, and the forest was dead silent as we stood side by side, guns trained on the trail we had just come from. The only thing that could be heard was our heavy, rhythmic breathing. As quickly as the silence had settled, it was ruptured again by a howling, snarling creature that came sprinting out of the underbrush. It was massive, probably 8 feet tall if it wasn't hunched over, rippling with muscles. It had the head of some sort of mangy, evil dog, and red eyes that betrayed a terrible, primal hunger. It had far too many teeth for a normal dog, and the tongue that lolled from its mouth was yellow, red, and black from the fat, blood, and marrow it had been feeding on. Max managed to loose a shot at it, and it connected with the beast's shoulder, causing it to stagger slightly in its forward sprint. It was moving faster than anything I had ever seen and leapt the last 20 feet to land directly on Max and send him sprawling to the ground. It snarled at me looking like it was ready to pounce, but it snapped its attention away, when Max sank a knife into its side. The extra second was all I needed. I raised my rifle and put a bullet directly through the head of the beast, which caused it to freeze, totter for a moment, and collapse to the ground next to Max. I helped him back to his feet, but he was in a bad condition. The beast's claws had raked him all along the side of his body, and the impact of the tackle had clearly broken a number of his ribs. I slung his rifle back over his shoulder and draped his arm over my shoulder, beginning to stagger the two of us back towards the station. "Nice shot." Max smiled weakly as he attempted to wipe the beast blood off his face. "Thanks." We listened, and while we could still hear some howling, it sounded far off again. I hoped that 'tis one had been a lone hunter from the pack, and we would have enough time to reach the station. We did. It took almost another 2 hours as we staggered along, but eventually we reached the station. I had radioed back to the other ranger units on the lay a few hours back that our situation was lost, and the Ironsides and Headless Men were now moving north in full force to support us. They said they would rendezvous with us at the ranger station, but I knew that would take almost a full day. Max died. His breathing had grown rapid and shallow, and I'm guessing he drowned on his own blood based on how much he eventually puked up. There wasn't time for a burial. I found explosives. The pack, it's very close now. I'm thinking they'll reach the station in the next half hour, if I'm lucky, but I have the explosives. They won't know what hit him. For the first time in my life, though, I don't think the fear is primal or instinctual or whatever anymore. I think the fear is mine. Captain Collins, the last night crawler. Fifth story. A dogman took my family from me. I won't let it take her too. Back in Harlan County, cradled by ancient mountains shrouded in mist, my days unfolded like chapters of a haunting novel. Guilt and isolation clung to me like the persistent fog, swirling around the memories that haunted every corner of our small town. The shadows of a past tragedy gripped my soul, and the once vibrant threads of family happiness were torn forever. It all began with my father's disappearance, a vanishing act that left behind an emptiness too vast to comprehend. The aftershocks rattled through the years, a silent tremor that shattered the foundations of our family. The true abyss opened when my younger brother, Lewis, followed suit, a void that swallowed my innocence, leaving behind the bitter aftertaste of perceived failure. The last image of Lewis lingered in my mind, painted in the hues of a setting sun that cast long, ominous shadows across our backyard. I had been entrusted with his care, an innocent responsibility that became a nightmare when sleep claimed me. As the world faded into dreams, so did Lewis, leaving me with the suffocating weight of a momentary lapse that irrevocably altered our lives. In our once lively home, my mother became a distant figure, navigating the sea of her own sorrow. The walls echoed with the hollowness of grief, an unspoken agony that widened the chasm between us. Growing up, my life transformed into a purgatory where whispers and sidelong glances painted me as the haunted boy, a living reminder of the tragedy that had befallen our family. Amidst this desolation, a flicker of warmth emerged in Rachel. Her laughter, like a sunbeam cutting through storm clouds, became my sanctuary. Her kindness acted as a healing balm, momentarily soothing the wounds of my fractured soul. For a brief, ephemeral moment, I dared to believe in a life beyond the ghostly echoes of my past. Yet, hope is a delicate thing, easily trampled by the looming shadows of secrets buried beneath its serene facade. The day Rachel went missing, tranquility shattered, replaced by the panic that gripped our community. The town whispered of a malevolent force, a returning specter that sought to claim its toll once more. Driven by a desperation I could no longer contain, I embarked on a journey through the hidden corridors of Harlan's history. Old newspapers, forgotten journals, and the eerie tales passed down by the townsfolk unveiled a dark truth lurking in the forest, the legend of a creature born of collective nightmares. as I delved deeper into the mysteries surrounding Rachel's disappearance. I found myself confronting not just the literal monster in the woods, but the metaphorical ones that had long tormented my soul. The journey became a reflection of my inner struggles, a path that meandered through the twisted corridors of my memories. The forest transformed into a crucible of nightmares where the air was thick with the scent of pine and the ground crunched beneath my footsteps. Each revelation led me deeper into the heart of darkness, where the trees stood like silent witnesses to the ghosts of my past and the monsters spawned from my own guilt. With every step, the shadows clawed at my resolve, threatening to pull me into the abyss. The pursuit of Rachel became a battle not just against the beast I was certain had taken her, but against the shadows that clung to my heart. I knew that confronting the creature meant facing the darkest corners of my own past. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the desolate clearing where I stood. My heart hammered in my chest, a steady rhythm of anticipation mingled with fear. The time for hiding was over. It was time to face the beast that haunted both this forest and my own tortured memories. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.